Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lauren Willette, and I work as the Folk Arts Survey Coordinator for Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts, which is a statewide public folklore program housed at the University of Arkansas Libraries in Fayetteville. We have three mainstay programs: this web series, the apprenticeship program, and our community scholars program. You can learn more at our website, folklife.uark.edu, which is in the chat. You can also see past sessions of this web series on our YouTube page. And today I'm so happy to have Janis F. Kearney with me. She's an author, a publisher, a journalist, a writing instructor, and a literary coach. She served in the Clinton administration from 1993 to 2001, beginning as presidential diarist in 1995. And then in 2001, she was selected as a fellow for the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. She's written or co-written 17 books. And Janis is also a community activist. In 2014, she founded Celebrate Project Maya, and it honors the legacy of Dr. Angelo through service to Arkansas communities and schools. And you can learn more about Janis at her website, janisfkearney.com. Also the link in the chat. So so I'm just taking a second. So first, I think let's just talk about your writing and the different types of writing that you do and have done in your career.
Okay, thank you, Lauren, first of all, for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So in all of the good work that you all do, and University of Arkansas is where I spent much of my young adult life. So two things that I really love about what you're doing. Writing has been something that's been a part of my life for a long time. I started writing when I was very young. But because I got married very young, actually at the University of Arkansas, I didn't become a writer per se until 2001. So I was one of those people who began writing later in life. I had done a lot of different things. I tell people that I lived kind of a jagged path to my writing life. But once I started writing, I felt that this definitely was what I was put on this earth to do. I thought I was going to be a fiction writer because that's what I loved. I loved murder mysteries. I loved romance to a certain extent, but I definitely thought I would be creating stories and writing novels. But when I first began writing, I also knew that I had always wanted to tell my father's story. He lived an extraordinary life, and he would sit and tell us about it. He was this amazing storyteller, and I just fell in love with his story. So I knew I wanted to do that. But once I started doing that, and I would send my drafts out and let people read them, and I would do workshops, and then I was told over and over, maybe you should make this your story, and you add your father and all the people in your life into the story, but it should be your story. So I did. My very first book became my memoir, Cotton Field of Dreams. And that after that, I just kept writing nonfiction rather than fiction, because I also felt that it was important to tell true stories as well. So I've written about several people like Daisy Bates, who was also my mentor and someone that I worked with and knew. I wrote about Mahalia Jackson, as you know. I wrote about my father. And I wrote with a number of people whose names aren't well known, but they lived extraordinary lives. So I thought, long and hard about it, and decided that nonfiction was definitely important to me to write about. But I did end up writing murder mysteries. So in 2016, I think it was, 2008 actually. I wrote a murder mystery, but it was based on a real murder that took place in Dumas, Arkansas. So I fictionalized it, put it in a different venue, and changed names and all of that. So I did write that, and then I've written a second one, a series. It became a series. So I've written the second one, and I've started on a third one. But I'll never give up biography and memoir and all of that ever, because nonfiction is important to write as well.
Yeah, that was great. I'm going to share my screen just to show your website. And again, the link to that's in the chat. These are the books that are available for purchase there. And you guys know there's a lot of them on sale. So if you're interested, um, it's
They've
a
been
good
around for a little bit.
but you can see the books that she did about her time in the Clinton administration here, the memoir. So I just wanted to show this for a moment, and then we'll turn and talk about this book called Only on Sundays, Mahalia Jackson's Long Journey next. Let me stop my share. So that's your most recent book. Could you talk a little bit about how Mahalia Jackson, about her and how you decided to write this book? What inspired you?
Absolutely. My husband and I moved to Chicago after we left. We both worked in Washington, D.C. And in 2001, we moved to Chicago. And that's where I actually started writing. And I had written actually a couple of books before the subject of Mahalia Jackson came up. We got to know this couple, one of former political leader there in Chicago. And they invited us to dinner one evening. And my husband and I went to the home and had a wonderful dinner. And we were commenting about the house, how it was beautiful and had this really great ambience. And he said, well, you know whose house this was? And we said, no. And he said, this was Mahalia Jackson's home. And I was really blown away because I knew who she was, but I absolutely didn't know who she was. I didn't know very much about Mahalia Jackson at all at that point. But it was just amazing to me that we were sitting in her home having dinner. So as we got ready to leave, he gave me a couple of boxes and he said, when we moved into this home, and that was back in, must have been 1958 or 9. No, it must have been 69, because it was right before Mahalia Jackson passed away, which was 1972. He had purchased the home from her. And he said that whoever prepared the home, whoever cleaned it and, made sure everything was gone, had obviously left things up in the attic. So they had left like pictures and big, whole portraits that were huge, and boxes of information from Mahalia's life. And he had given a lot of it to the museums, but he did have a couple of boxes that he gave to me. And he said, I'm giving this to you because I know you write, and I'm asking you to please consider writing about Mahalia Jackson. And I did, but I had to do a lot of research because I really did not know about her, not the way that I learned who she was. The only thing that I remembered about Mahalia Jackson from my childhood was the fact that my family used to watch Imitation of Life, which was a movie, the late 50s came out. And my parents would watch that every year, and we would watch it with them. And I remembered seeing Mahalia Jackson singing toward the end of that movie. And that's what I knew about her. That's all I knew about her. So I had my work cut out for me. I traveled to New Orleans, where she was born, where she grew up, where she left when she was 16 years old and went to Chicago. And then I stayed there and talked to people and met people and went to the space that was hers when she grew up, went to her burial site right outside New Orleans, and made several trips to Washington, D.C. to do research and back to Chicago as well. So I was just fascinated to learn so many things about her during my research.
Yeah, so she was a gospel singer, and I'm sure there's more to her story. Can you tell us a little bit for those who don't know?
Yeah, she was a gospel singer, and she started singing very early at 4 years old down in New Orleans. Her mother, who she grew up with, she grew up with this house of women, basically her aunts and her mother, and she had an uncle who would come back and forth. Her father actually lived around the corner from them, and she got to know him briefly, but she didn't have a real relationship with him until she was older. But she sang, and everybody knew about Mahalia Jackson, little Mahalia Jackson's voice. And her aunt told her that her aunt was considered a seer, so she could foresee things. And she told Mahalia that she would one day walk with kings and queens. And Mahalia, I think, believed that. So when she decided, when she was 16 years old and said she wanted to leave with her aunt and go to Chicago, even though she told her aunts, her mother had died by that time, she told the aunt that she lived with that she was going to become a nurse in Chicago. But in her heart of hearts, she wanted to follow her dream to become a singer, and she did eventually. But she had some hard times, some really hard times in Chicago, because her kind of singing was not embraced by a lot of the churches, the Black churches in Chicago. And I say in my book that part of that was most of the families that moved from New Orleans and the South to Chicago, they really wanted to leave a lot of things behind, didn't want to bring them to Chicago. And Mahalia represented, that kind of church singing that they didn't want to relate to. So she had a really hard time. She ended up having to sing at tent meetings and really small churches, and actually going outside Chicago to sing. But eventually, uh, producers and people who did radio shows and people who did big acts, they noticed her, and she began to slowly build up a following, and she became the most popular singer in the country. And she ended up traveling all over the world. People absolutely loved her all over the world. So she had a really successful career once it got off the ground. But her personal life was different. Her personal life was never what I would consider happy. She married twice. Her first husband was a gambler, and that did not jibe well because Mahalia Jackson was very religious, and she couldn't see staying married to a man who gambled, and he was a serious gambler. And her second husband, who was a musician, a wonderful musician, I understand, but they were not, they were not alike in very many ways. And a lot of people felt like he married her as an opportunity to move up and help his own music. So they stayed married, I guess, about 5 or 6 years, and they had a really, really hard divorce. And I think at that point is when Mahalia Jackson really started getting ill, and her health started suffering after she went through that really hard divorce. She died in 1972. She had just turned 60 years old, And she had had health problems off and on, but they kind of exasperated as she got older.
Yeah, well, thank you. I wasn't very familiar with Miss Jackson before talking with you about this session, and so I've looked her up and was really moved by her voice. Her voice is
Yeah.
truly beautiful. So if you've not heard her sing, I would definitely look her up because it's well worth it. So for this book, you mentioned that you had done some work with interviews and research. Could you describe that process and how you went about it for us?
Sure, sure. The fact that I did not know very much about her kind of required that I do research. So I love oral history. I love interviewing people, especially people who know the subject. So my trip to New Orleans, I think, was one of the most important to what I was doing. I interviewed people who knew her, but also people who didn't know her, but knew of her and knew about the history of the place that she grew up, which was the poorest area in New Orleans. So they could tell us that history. They knew about what was going on in New Orleans at the time that Mahalia Jackson was growing up. It was in the Jim Crow era. And, you know, there was a lot of harsh things going on. And those are the things that Mahalia Jackson had to contend with as a child. So I was able to talk to them. I was not able to talk to her family members at that point because they were in the middle of working with a production company for a movie on Mahalia Jackson. They were very nice, but they asked me to please talk to their lawyer and see if they could talk to me, and I did. And he said, well, not right now, but come back to us if you'd like. So I wasn't able to talk to them. I have gotten to know several of them since then, and I will actually be going down and meeting all of them in February. But I was able to talk to singers who knew her. I was able to talk to some political leaders down there who knew her there as well as in Chicago. So a lot of mine was kind of seeking out people who knew her personally, but also going into like the Library of Congress and doing research that way. And there were several books that had, not several, but there had been a few books that had been written about her. So I was able to kind of utilize those as well, see what people had written about her before.
Right. A lot of different types of research and work goes into
Yes.
this type of writing. So as a way to talk more about oral history work and interviews, you have the book, and you already mentioned this, about your dad and his life. It's called Sundays with TJ, 100 Years of Memories on Varner Road. Right? Okay. So can you describe a little bit about that book, and then we'll talk about the process?
Sure. That was the book that I was supposed to have been writing before I wrote my book. And everyone said, write your story first. So I went back. My father lived to be 107. And I had moved I was in Chicago, and I realized that he was 105, and I came back home. And at that point, I decided that I need to go ahead and write his book. So I wrote his book based on our conversations at that point, but mostly conversations we'd had over the years. I used to sit and interview him and actually take notes. And I, at some point, started taping him, actually taping his conversations. My dad was just this amazing person who wanted to share his life story, and he did it so well. And that's what my book is based on, the stories he told us over the years about his life and about his family and his parents, and then about us, about raising his family, which were 19 children down on Varna Road, 17 that actually grew up on Varna Road. And so it's kind of a chronicle of his life from a child on until he, into his 100 years. So I did a lot of that back and forth with him, but I also asked all of my siblings to submit essays about their memories of growing up on Varna Road with my parents, and they knocked it out of the park. They were some beautiful, beautiful essays and memories, and that takes up a chapter in my book as well. So yeah, interviews, memories, some were taped, some were written, but a lot of it is just me sitting and talking with my dad and him remembering things.
So, your dad, I know he was born in the early 1900s in Southeast Arkansas. Can you give just a little bit more details about him?
Yeah, he was born in Chico County, Lake Village, 1906. Uh, he was very close to his father, but his father died when he was pretty young. His father died when he was about, I think it was 9 years old, and they were itinerant farmers. My grandfather had owned land in Chico County, but somehow my dad said that he ended up losing that land, and they ended up moving from Chico County to Lincoln County, and that's where my grandfather died, in Lincoln County. And my father, who loved my grandfather so much, he said he was just lost after his father died. And my father left home when he was 11 years old, and he traveled around the country from 11 to 26 years old. So a lot of the stories that he shared are about those times. He used to jump trains, and he used to work for people all over the country. He was a cook. He worked on a ranch. He worked in, of course, agriculture, but he also he worked on a ship that took him to Cuba and one to England. So, and he said he learned how to speak some French, some Spanish, and I think he called it Creole, some Creole. So he was just so interested in life, I think. So he eventually came back and settled in Arkansas at 26 years old and met my mother. And that's a whole amazing story, but it takes too long. So they met and they married and began to have this family. And they were farmers. They weren't farmers. They were itinerant farmers like his dad for a long time. They only owned very few acres at all in their lifetime, but they made a living working farms that belonged to someone else. And that's how they made their living. They taught us, the importance of work and the importance of education, all the things that we needed to know to survive in the world.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So can you tell us what some of the best practices that you bring to do in oral history interviews, what those are?
I think an open mind is one of them. Try to get rid of preconceptions as much as possible. A deep interest in the subject, the person that I'm interviewing, or their life or the environment. If I need to know about that. I think that's the most important thing. A deep interest, allowing the person who you're interviewing to tell their story. Don't come with preconceived notions. I I love open-ended questions because I think you get so much more from the interviewee when you give them open-ended questions and just let them go with that. And I also like to bring like buzzwords, things that I think people will kind of make them, okay, I remember now, and then just, they'll go off based on that one word. So I just love oral history. I really do. I always come away knowing so much more than I thought I would know because I kind of allow people to give me more than, they thought they could give. That's the thing that really amazes me is most people will say, oh, I don't know that much about that, or I really don't have anything, that you're interested in. But once we get to talking and making them feel comfortable and letting them see my interest, how interested I am in them, they always give me so much more than they thought.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way you talk about give you more than what they thought. I'm going to take that into my own work and view of it. So what are some of the differences between doing this type of research and oral history collection when you're close to the subject like you were with your father, and then when you're not as close with it?
Yeah, that is a good question. Of course, I think when it's someone I'm close to, there's that passion, that there's that personal connection. And some of the things, I think it's easier because you know a lot of the answers already. Uh, and it's just closer to your heart. It really is. It's a labor of love, I think, as much as anything else. But also when you're writing about someone else who you think have done amazing work or is has contributed so much to the world, that's also passionate for me because I feel it's so important to get their story out there. A lot of times there are people who've done so many things and people just don't know about them. So I'm just as passionate in a different way to make sure I get their story right and to get their story out there. I've done a couple of books on elderly people. They came to me and said, you know what, I've been wanting to write my story for so long, but I've never known how to get started. I've been scared to get started. And I'm always, I want to say no because I really don't have time. But once I talk to them, their story is so intriguing that I'll work with them. I've done that several times, and they just have amazing, amazing lives. And two of those, one of the gentlemen who I did a book on, he actually died last year. So I feel really, really good. He was 92, and I felt really good that I had done his story. And then another gentleman, he was actually 94 when he decided he wanted to write his book. And he's still here, but he's pretty much in hospice right now. But I just feel really good that I was able to work with them to get their stories out before too late.
Yeah. It's nice to when you know that their stories are important to sort of tell that story, but also give that person their whole legacy as
Yes,
a full human.
exactly.
I think that's an important part of it as well. So is there anything you want before we turn to talk about the Celebrate Project Maya? Is there anything else that you want to mention about your career as an author?
I just always tell people that I feel like when I was growing up, I wanted to be either a writer or a missionary. And I want to think that my writing is my mission. This is how I give back. So writing is something that I take very, very seriously. I believe in honing your craft and working on it, you know, nonstop. You never get to a point where you feel like, oh, I'm here and I don't need to work on it anymore. I'm very serious about it, but I also, there's a joy in it. And I try to tell young people when I do workshops with young people that there's a joy. Give yourself time, work on it. It is a serious thing, but there's also a lot of joy in putting down words and creating stories. So I just feel like God has really blessed me with writing, and I try to share it as much as possible. I started back in 2015 something called the Read, Write, Share weekend, where we invite emerging writers, people who think they want to write, or they're afraid to get started writing. They're afraid to tell people what they want to write about, to a weekend of writing and learning about writing. And we've been doing that for a little while and just have gotten some amazing writers through that. And that's another way I feel like we are giving back.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a really great way to frame the way that you do your work. That's beautiful. I want to, as we start talking about the Celebrate Maya project. Oh, I've been saying it backwards.
That's okay.
Sorry.
It works either way.
I wanted to show the organization's website. So right now they're doing a capital campaign to renovate a 99-year-old home in the Little Rock High school district, that historic district where they can have a home base for Celebrate Maya project. So there's the website. And what can you tell us about the work that this organization does and how you got it started?
Yes, absolutely. This is another passion of mine. I always say that writing, it was something that I couldn't not do. I had to do the writing. This is something I chose to do because I feel so, I believe that Maya Angelou gave so much and contributed so much to the world. And when she died in 2014, when there was no statewide event happening to celebrate her life, I reached out to some women and asked if they would participate, they would work with me to create an event that celebrated her life. And we did that in 2014. We worked with the city of Stamps. A lot of people don't know that she spent much of her childhood in Stamps, Arkansas. So, and she called Arkansas home because actually that's where she became Maya. She had a traumatic childhood. I don't know how many people know that, but she was sent from St. Louis to Arkansas, to Stamps, Arkansas, to her grandmother to heal. And that's where she healed from the trauma that she had gone through. So Stamps was an important, very important part of her becoming Maya Angelou. And so when she died in 2014, this little group of women, about 10 or 12 women, got together and we created a day of remembrance in Stamps, Arkansas, in partnership with the city and with the mayor and with a lot of nonprofits down there. And it was a really, really amazing day. And we brought in some of the people who grew up with her down in Stamps, Arkansas, and we brought in her grandson, Elliot, who is now one of our, biggest ambassadors. And we did that, and then we came back in 2015 and decided we would create a program that really represented her life and use that program to help children find their voices, because Maya Angelou lost her voice because of the trauma that she went through. And it was years before she could speak again. And her thing was that she always wanted to help young people find their voices. especially young girls. And we wanted to create a program that helped that. We do literacy, we do writing and poetry and history. We publish books, have children to write, and we create books. We bring in people to speak. We have public forums. We try to work with the community at the same time as we work with children. We believe in the whole village philosophy. We believe that the parents and the schools and the churches and all of that are just much more important than who we are. So we definitely try to partner with everybody when we try to impact children. So we've been doing this, and we're in about 10 different counties right now. We've worked with about 10 different counties, but we do consider ourselves statewide. We just haven't made it all over the state yet. We focus a lot on the Delta because of the problems in the Delta, the historic problems in the Delta, but we also work in other parts of the state, Central Arkansas, as well as like Blythesville. We've done work in that area. But we'll be doing much more all over the state as we move forward. We give scholarships each year, usually 2 scholarships. We've given as many as 4 before. Right now, we make sure that we give scholarships in Stamps, Arkansas. We want to make sure of that, but we also give scholarships to other parts of the state as well. We do poetry awards to young people. We have some amazing poets out here. So one of the things we ask is for students to write poetry that represents Maya Angelou's life, how she lived her life. And we also ask them to do essays. So all of that goes into the poetry awards and the academic awards that we give. Those are important. We have connected with her grandson and her great-granddaughter, and they are, they completely support our work, and they are looking forward to coming back when we do our ribbon cutting and when we open up our new building. That will be the Dr. Maya Angelou House and the Celebrate Maya Project headquarters. So we are still we are working now to create a Maya Angelou garden, literacy and living garden. So I have someone working on creating curriculum and programming for that. We don't have a garden per se, but we have a number of people we can partner with, but eventually we want to identify space for our own garden. So those are the things. We're in the middle of campaigning, raising money. We're looking forward to getting in our own space so that we can do more work, more intentional work. After COVID, we decided we really need to do more intentional work because children are still suffering from the impact of COVID. So we want to do a lot more mentoring and a lot more tutoring and bringing people in to talk specifically about some of the problems that children are hurting children. So we have a lot of work to do, and we are excited about what we'll be doing once we get our own building.
Well, I would just add that the work that I've encountered that the Celebrate Maya project has done, what I see in it is that you're building really lasting relationships with, especially with the young people and the students that you work with.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, shout out to the Delta Symposium, because that's how that's the event that got me to know about your work at all. But yeah, so it's, I feel like when you if you can, I've seen you interact with the students there, and it's impressive, and you can tell that they have a real relationship with you, which is such an important part of that work, I think.
Thank you.
So Dr. Angelou was and I'm still in this, I took this phrasing from your website, was a civil rights and social humanities advocate. And there's a legacy of African American women who commit so much of their time, energy, and lives to community activism and service. And of course, you're among those women. And I just wonder if you could speak to how that legacy has inspired you and your work.
That's a great question. And there's so many women that have inspired me over the years. And I think it started even when I was growing up with my mom, who was a part of a lot of different organizations I didn't realize until later on. But I think it started there, and my teachers, people who spoke up for, the need for education and, improving education. There were people in our community down in Gould, Arkansas, that were part of a lot of the organizations that, larger communities were doing for civil rights. So I witnessed a lot of that growing up, but later on, my father introduced me to Daisy Bates when I was 16 years old and told me this woman helped change the world. And I'm saying, how did she do that? And he told me about her role with the 1957 Central High integration crisis, and how she stood up, and this little tiny woman, and how she was one of the first women presidents of the NAACP, and that a lot of people didn't feel like she deserved to be there, but she was there, and she did things that other people wouldn't do. So when I met her, I decided I wanted to be as much like her as I could be, not only because she was a journalist, and then I knew that I wanted to write, but also just to stand up for right, stand up for children. And I never forgot meeting her. I never forgot that I wanted to be like her. It was a long time before I met her again, 20 years. But when I met her again, she had started her newspaper back. Her newspaper had been closed in 1959 because of her and her husband's role with the 1957 integration crisis. So all the ads were pulled from her newspaper. So she was able to start it back in 1984. And then in 1987, she needed a managing editor, and I became her managing editor and reminded her that I'd met her when I was 16 years old. So she, of course, was my shero, my mentor, someone that I really wanted to emulate a lot. But there are a lot of women that I've come across over the years that I just look up to so much. Women in Washington, D.C., when I was there, some of the political leaders, the First Lady, who I really admired very much, her position on women and children, the things that she fought for, healthcare, all of those things. I have come in contact with women who step outside their comfort zone and speak up. I didn't know Maya Angelou growing up, but I did learn about her later on, and she was very brave. A lot of people don't know that she worked for the civil rights struggle, that she was part of Martin Luther King's SCLC, that she did a lot of things behind the scenes. And she used that. She used her advocacy in her poetry. She used it in her storytelling. If anytime you read something that she's written, you can feel that it's coming from her heart and her soul. So I really admire the fact that she was able to transfer her advocacy into her literature, and that's a way that she shared it with the world. But there's just too many women for me to even try to name. But one person that I never imagined as a civil rights advocate was Mahalia Jackson. To me, she was a gospel singer. But as I did the research on her, I realized that she and Martin Luther King Jr. were very, very, very close, and that she counseled him, and he would ask, for her to help him. She was also a fundraiser, a huge fundraiser for him. She believed completely in everything that he did, and she worked very hard to make sure that he was able to do it. And one of the stories that people tell a lot is the fact that his speech, "I Have a Dream," he would not have given that speech in 1968, except for 63, I'm sorry, except for Mahalia Jackson, who was on the stage singing that day. And he began to give his speech, and she reminded him, "Tell him about the dream. Tell them about the dream. Tell them about the dream." So he switched from the speech that he was going to give that day and did the "I Have a Dream" speech because of Mahalia Jackson. So in her own way, even though she was a world-renowned gospel singer, she was also a civil rights advocate, and she supported the civil rights struggle very, very much. So there's just endless women. One of the things that I talk a lot about is the fact that there are so many women that have given so much and done so much, and a lot of their names you'll never hear because they were in the background and no one gave them credit. So when we see women whose names are there, they're the very lucky ones. There are so many that should have had their names out there.
Yeah, that's that last point. All your points were good, but that last one is especially true and bittersweet in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I If you're okay with it, I want to go ahead and ask one more question, which is,
Mm-hmm.
just if you could speak a little bit more to your time about working at the Arkansas State Press newspaper with your mentor, Daisy Bates, or afterward. And I'll you can go ahead and start talking. I am going to share the screen one more time to show an
Okay,
image of that newspaper from the 40s.
sure. Yeah, in 1987, I had been working with state government. When I left the University of Arkansas, where I graduated from, I went to work for state government, and I'd been working there for 7 years when someone came to me and said, "Daisy Bates is looking for a managing editor. Her managing editor is leaving and going to the University of Arkansas Law School." And I thought it was a message from God. I really did, to me, that it was time for me to do something closer to my passion. And I went and interviewed with her, and she gave me the job. I became her managing editor. And I tell people it was the hardest job I have ever done in my life. But it was a true labor of love because I was working with someone I admired so very much. But also, I believed it was important. It was a mission, work of missionary, because we were doing something that a lot of people felt was not being done in mainstream newspapers. We were giving news that they would not find in other newspapers. So Daisy Bates had started getting, she started getting sickly. And one day she walked in. I'm the managing editor, and she says, "I'm getting ready to retire, and I'm going home, and I'm going to sell the newspaper." And I said, "No, no, you can't do that. I left my state job to go to work for you." And she said, "No, I have to. I'm getting tired and sickly." So she did. And I went home really dejected and prayed about it. And I came back a couple of days later and asked her if she would sell the newspaper to me. And she looked at me really strange, like, "What?" And she thought about it. She went back and thought about it for some days, and she came back and said, "Something's telling me to do this. Something's telling me that you have the fire in the belly that is needed to run a small African American newspaper because it takes something different." So I couldn't believe that she had said yes, and I also was scared to death. But I began running the newspaper as its publisher and editor for a while, and did that for about 7 years, I guess. 5 years, 5 or 6 years. And then I went to work with Bill Clinton, and my sister ran it for a while. And then we closed it, and we were going to reopen it, but I ended up leaving. So now I own the Arkansas State Press newspaper, but it is not active. But that was one of the most important periods of my life, because I felt like I really was doing something that was worthy. I learned so very much about myself. I learned so much about politics that I didn't know about civics and civil government and just people. So it was a great opportunity of learning for me.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to give you a chance to add anything else in before we let the audience ask any questions that they might have.
I guess I just want to say thank you, Lauren, for having me here and talking about things that I haven't talked about for a while. But I think writing and stories are just, they'll never not be important. I think our lives are kind of built on stories. Our lives, or, stories make our lives important. And we need to keep finding stories, writing stories, sharing stories. And holding on to them. I think that's very, very important. And I'll be doing it until I can't do it anymore, for sure.
Well, it's been an honor to speak with you. I've learned quite a bit today, and it's really wonderful. It's I've said it. I already said the word honor, but it's a real honor to get to speak with you about the ways that you've been a civil rights advocate and a social justice advocate, and I feel like your work is probably not always seen in that light, but that is a really big part of it, and I think it's important to think about it, in many ways, because you've done dynamic work, but it does touch on those issues. So do we have any questions from the audience? And you're welcome to unmute and ask, or you can put them in chat and I can read them out loud.
Lauren, we had one question in the chat that Janis, you did touch on a little bit almost immediately after the question was put in there. But when you do your interviews with people, do you take notes, or do you do audio recording, or a mixture?
A mixture, definitely. Especially now, I feel like my memory isn't quite as good as it used to be. It used to be like excellent, but it's good, but it's not as good as it used to be. So I do both, absolutely.
Also, we did put a link to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas about the Arkansas State Press, if anybody wants to know more about that. So it's not looking like we have any questions.
I see someone's hand up. Who is that?
Oh.
Hannah?
I don't know if can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. If my hand was up, that was an
Oh, that
accident.
was a mistake.
But I was actually typing in the chat, so maybe that's what it was. But I was just saying thank you so much for coming today. This was so interesting, and I love storytellers. I am from the Deep South, and so we grew up.
Yes.
That's our way of communication is storytelling.
Yes.
And so I just have loved listening to you. Tell your story or pieces of your story. And so I'm excited to buy a few of your books.
Thank you.
And read
Thank
more.
you
So
very much, Hannah.
yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yep. So thank you guys all so much for being here with us today. Thank you, Janis, so much for your time, your energy, your thoughtfulness, and just sharing about your life. It's been very meaningful, and I appreciate all of you for attending and for your support. And you can look for the recording of this to show up on our YouTube page in the next couple of weeks. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye.